They trained together under the same sun, on the same open field, surrounded by armored vehicles, aircraft, and watching eyes, and from the outside it looked like perfect unity, Japanese and South Korean forces moving side by side, executing drills with precision, while one quiet observer stood in the foreground, watching calmly, already sensing that beneath the discipline and coordination, two very different ways of thinking about war were quietly preparing to collide. Inside the briefing rooms, officers from both nations leaned over maps and digital screens, tracing routes, marking objectives, reviewing contingencies, everything measured and deliberate, the atmosphere disciplined and professional, while the observer stood quietly at the back, listening not just to the plans, but to the tone of voices, the pauses between decisions, and the subtle differences in how each side spoke about risk. The early exercises went smoothly, soldiers moved in formation, commands were followed instantly, coordination appeared flawless, and confidence grew with every completed drill. The observer watched closely as cooperation seemed effortless. Yet even then, small differences appeared in posture, pacing, and response time, differences easy to miss unless you were looking for them. As training intensified, the contrast became clearer. On one side, Japanese formations emphasized structure, alignment, and collective movement. On the other, South Korean units moved faster, adjusted more freely, and pushed ahead when opportunities appeared. The observer standing between both approaches could see it clearly now. This was not about skill, it was about philosophy. Inside the Japanese command center, simulations were reviewed carefully, data was verified, decisions were aligned across levels before execution. Every move designed to minimize error, preserve cohesion, and maintain control. The observer noticed how calm the room felt even under pressure, confidence built on discipline. In the South Korean command room, the energy was different. Officers moved quickly between stations, decisions were made faster, authority flowed downward, urgency filled the air, the observer could feel the intensity. This was a space built for momentum, not patience. Then the simulation changed unexpectedly. The mock enemy altered behavior without warning. Screens lit up, alerts sounded, and tension rose instantly. The observer watched as both sides faced the same surprise, yet reacted in very different ways. Japanese units paused, reassessed, tightened formation, and waited for confirmation, maintaining cohesion and avoiding overextension. The observer saw restraint, control, and trust in the system guiding every move. South Korean units surged forward immediately, exploiting the opening before it closed. Movement accelerated. Commands were short and sharp. The observer watched momentum take over, speed becoming the weapon. Soon, communication channels grew crowded, radio chatter overlapped, corrections followed corrections, and information arrived faster than it could be perfectly organized. The observer stood still amid the noise, realizing that this was where cooperation would truly be tested. In the air, Japanese fighter jets flew in tight formation, movements precise and synchronized, every pilot supporting the group. Radar screens showed clean patterns, discipline creating stability, and the observer watched how control shaped the skies. South Korean jets broke formation more often, maneuvered aggressively, took sharper angles and pushed advantage. Radar feeds showed rapid shifts, speed dominating the airspace, and the observer saw risk and opportunity moving side by side. When a simulated counterattack hit, Japanese forces absorbed the impact steadily, maintaining position and minimizing losses, but momentum slowed. The observer saw how stability came at the cost of initiative. South Korean forces countered hard and fast, regaining momentum quickly, but exposing themselves in the process. Losses climbed, and the observer watched the trade-off unfold in real time. At sea, Japanese ships held layered defensive formations, controlling engagement zones with precision. The observer standing on deck could feel the confidence in structure, every vessel protecting the whole. South Korean naval units advanced aggressively, repositioning rapidly, forcing reactions, pushing pressure outward. The observer saw assertiveness shaping the battlefield, but also the strain it created. As hours passed, fatigue began to show. Commanders' faces tightened, voices slowed, and the cost of sustained pressure became visible. The observer noticed that endurance, not firepower, was becoming the real test. Quiet rivalry emerged, not spoken but felt. Pride rested in restraint on one side and initiative on the other. Officers measured success differently now, and the observer stood between them, aware that philosophy was now competing as much as tactics. The most critical moment came during a simulated rescue and counterstrike under strict time limits. Assets stood ready, waiting for final confirmation. The observer watched decision clocks tick down. South Korean units committed immediately, speed prioritized, risk accepted, objectives reached quickly. The observer saw action rewarded, but at a cost. The results were laid out plainly: faster success on one side, greater preservation on the other, higher losses versus sustained strength. The observer reflected silently, knowing there was no simple answer. When the exercise ended, no winner was declared. Officers reviewed results quietly, respect intact but assumptions shaken. The observer stood thoughtfully, aware that something fundamental had shifted. In the analysis room, charts, timelines, and casualty simulations filled the walls. Experts dissected every decision. The observer listened carefully as patterns emerged too consistent to ignore. Japan's strength in control, sustainability, and long-term stability was clear. Systems held, trust remained strong, but margins narrowed under speed. The observer watched conclusions take shape. South Korea's strength in speed, disruption, and seizing initiative was undeniable. Momentum was powerful, pressure was relieved early, but resources burned faster. The observer saw balance becoming the key theme. Quiet discussions followed. Both sides acknowledged weaknesses without blame. Respect deepened, understanding grew, and the observer noticed that real cooperation had finally begun. Training doctrines were adjusted, new coordination strategies developed, flexibility added to discipline, structure added to speed. The observer watched evolution replace pride. Two tactical paths, once separate, began to converge, lessons merging into shared direction. The observer walked forward, knowing this was the true success of the exercise. Later that night, alone on the base, lights glowing softly in the distance, the observer reflected on what had been learned, not about enemies, but about self-knowledge. At sunrise, the base prepared again, calmer, sharper, more aware, forces moving with renewed discipline and adaptability, and the observer walked forward confidently, understanding now that when they trained together, then watched their war strategies collide, they did not weaken each other. They revealed the balance needed to survive real war.